This is going to speak very specifically to what I understand to be a relationship that exists at this time regarding the former Soviet Union and Iraq. It's very specific and it's very literal. I'm going to start by acknowledging that I've come to be aware of in the last several years that there were executive orders that were put into place under the former administration of George H.W. Bush concerning the relationship between humanitarian service and military service providers or military assistance and humanitarian assistance in Iraq during the Gulf War, as well as how to address concerns regarding the handling of chemical and biological weapons. Now, one of these specifically, I have invoked in a request for investigation of my certificates and non-destructive testing going all the way back to the autumn of 2017. To this time, I've not heard back from anybody, and that executive order has been changed by another executive order since that time, including in a manner that is suspect for an understanding that a version of the change to that executive order appeared in the fall of 2018, that does not appear currently, but rather that the change to that executive order is had supposedly occurred later, according at least to the electronic records now available. I bring this up because I believe that these executive orders, as well as other policy that was implemented around the first Gulf War, had a very specific impact on consideration of what happened after the war and after the deposement of Saddam Hussein to the oil fields in Iraq. Currently, information is available about processes connected to tenders on oil fields in Iraq. I've looked through what is publicly available regarding this information. Last year, beginning in the fall of 2019 through this year, was a time frame wherein many of the processes of tendering oil fields in Iraq were meeting their halfway point. And in at least two instances, I believe last year up through this year, were timeframes during which it was understood that tenders were going to start opening. My understanding is that these arrangements were to last for anywhere from 10 years to maybe 20 years, in some cases 25 years. And I have records of my initial evaluation of this in the fall of 2019. I've only done a comprehensive follow-up in that regard once. The primary reason why is because I believe that my personal history directly intersects with contracting regarding gas and oil services in Iraq in a manner that is evident in one specific area, but that has implication on other areas. In the fall of 2013, when I was working at the Department of Public Health, I had an experience where I almost inexplicably became what some would identify as depressed, but it was not about that. My understanding now is that what was happening is there was some sort of very significant, massive reprogramming of a comprehensive database. And in the course of the reprogramming of that comprehensive database, part of what was happening is it was having an impact on me biophysiologically because my actual biophysiological processes had been connected to some form of cybernetics that associated me with that specific database. I knew that there were changes that were ongoing in relationship to medical diagnostic codes, but I did not know about the changes that were going on in regards to the specifics concerning billing for Medicare. I didn't find that out until later. The information now available has a different characterization of what was going on with the diagnostic codes, and it also has different characterization of what was going on with the changes to HIPAA than I was told about for the 3 months I was working the job before I started having this experience. So on one hand, I understand that what was happening is I had already been cybernetically enhanced to have a connection with the database associated with Medicare billings and codings, including in connection with the relationship between the actual billing and the increase in diagnostic codes that would be associated with those billing codes. And it was having a biophysiological impact on me. But there's also a very significant correlation between a floor speech that was made by then Senator Ted Cruz and the date and timing of an announcement of an Exxon tender in Iraq for oil and gas in Iraq. As a matter of fact, I believe the literal day that I ended up first calling in to work as too sick to work was the day that that deal was confirmed in regards to the nation of Iraq and Exxon. Why? was somebody working at a public health department in San Francisco being engaged in connection with the signing of a gas and oil contract in Iraq by a Texas company or a Texas based company? Is it connected to my past human capital inventory? Did somebody put me in a database with somebody else who literally worked for that company and then at some point in time decided they would recharacterize their concept of available assets and include me in there in a manner that had not previously been made available, including in connection with the fact that I was currently at that time working in the specific department I was working in regarding a healthcare provider, a public healthcare provider, by the way. A public healthcare provider, by the way, that represented a constituency that had a significant proportion of its population that had particular kinds of demographic backgrounds. See, at that time, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services had a very different manner of presenting information about cases pending regarding Medicare and Social Security fraud. Part of what I did as my job was review cases that were open or that had recently been closed regarding allegations of Medicare fraud. And what I found was actually alarming. I remarked on it to both of my supervisors at the time, including the person who was directly in control of or in charge of the compliance department, as well as the person that was in charge of the department for which the compliance department, the operations department. And I said to them, this doesn't make sense to me. There's a very disproportionate representation of people getting busted for Medicare fraud that are alleged to have come from and be trying to launder or otherwise commit Medicare fraud in association with exportation to Russia and the Ukraine. As a matter of fact, more than half the cases that were pending or that had recently been closed concerning accusations of Medicare fraud in the fall of 2013 included people whose point of origin was either Russia or the Ukraine. And this would have been what would have been in the database at the time that I had to, on a monthly basis, process and verify the certifications of more than 2,000 providers a month. Every single one of those 2,000, and I only had 1/4 of the providers that needed to be verified on a monthly basis, and every single one of them had to be verified through that very database every month. I contend that that absolutely, not only spiritually and etherically, but also on another level, literally, had to do with what happened to me in the autumn of 2013, and then what happened in March of 2014. If the currently available records concerning executive orders are correct, I ended up leaving, formally being separated from my job in compliance at the Department of Public Health, just in time for significant sanctions to come out against individuals from one of the countries that was disproportionately represented in that Medicare database as being engaged in acts of fraud. Why would this have anything to do with anything? Well, several years later, we're addressing the matters we're addressing now. Now, my understanding is Exxon's activities in Iraq are one thing, but my understanding also is that currently there are tenders for oil fields in Iraq that include combinations between former Soviet assets that are now identified as Russian assets and coordination with other national interests in and through Iraq. And so whatever would, yes, last year have been a consideration of the imperative around trying to honor whatever could have been considered some sort of obligation in association with outlays associated with Iraq or the former Soviet Union, take on a new tenor in the ongoing year, in the intervening year, especially with this other information coming forward. Part of what is going to be happening as I move forward on these charges is I'm going to be trying to press charges concerning what I understand to be acts of overt political retaliation against me and other people with whom I was engaged in 2008 during the election cycle, specifically regarding efforts to challenge what was understood to be a Democratic Party slate attempting to go to Washington, D.C. in connection with ongoing allegations of criminal activity by individuals that were currently running for office at that time. and how the cover-ups of the crimes that were put into the public realm for examination, including in a manner that yielded criminal convictions for other people, just not the ones that ended up going to Washington, D.C., impacted me and other people that were attempting to mount some form of political opposition. For the record, I was not the candidate, but I supported who was the candidate. And the fact that he entered the election late as part of a third-party effort does not deter my determination to see us vindicated. I understood before the inauguration of who was alleged to be the president at the time that the original candidate had been subjected to some form of retaliation himself in order intentionally to eliminate him from consideration for that congressional position, despite the fact I understand he had substantial support from the community, and that when his brother stepped up to replace him, I knew his brother enough and supported his brother enough to believe that he would have made a valid candidate as opposed to who was the incumbent. I did not know at the time that part of what happened after that is that I personally, along with other people, was subjected to a specific kind of retaliation, including retaliation that used directed energy weapons against us, and certainly that our political rights were being intentionally dispossessed of us, and we were being intentionally slandered politically. So somebody else could use us as human harvest for research and development connected to contracting, including contracting for weapons that were we to have gone to DC together, we would have done everything we could to have made sure were either made illegal or rendered obsolete. They wouldn't have been necessary. There would have been other possibilities. Of course, those other possibilities would include successful prosecution of organized crime and its infiltration of the government in order to set an alternative political agenda that itself seems to be about normalizing and legitimizing crime as opposed to actually supporting the material foundation for economic safety or some form of political process for the citizens of this country. But that's not so dissimilar from what's going on in other places. And the hair splitting around degrees or metrics associated with leverageability has already taken too much political capital from my people and the peoples of other countries that I would otherwise be very happy to be working with right now. I hope you agree.